Hi, y'all. This is Kristen Chenoweth.
Hi, I'm Gloria Stefan.
This is Sarah Bareilles.
Hi, I'm Patti LuPone.
This is Lin-Manuel Miranda. You're listening to the Broadway Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Theater Podcast, intimate personal conversations with theater's biggest names. I'm your host, Alan Seals. We're just going to jump right into the interview here, but before we do, make sure to visit me online at Instagram and Twitter. Visit me at facebook.com/official theater podcast. Please leave a rating, leave a review, and now, here we go with Gen Parton-Shin.
I am not throwing away my shot 人生棒に振るもんかアメリカのよう生まれたての貧乏人生棒に振るもんか
My guest today got my attention after I watched several videos of himself and his friends performing Hamilton songs, translated expertly, I might say, to Japanese. He was Angel in the original Japanese production of Rent and has numerous additional credits, including Next to Normal, Rocky Horror, Miss Saigon, and even on TV on the Unbreakable Kimmy, Schmidt on Netflix. His credits have allowed him to perform all around the world. He seems like he has such an interesting life growing up, which we're going to get into right now. Gen Parton-Shin, welcome to the Theater Podcast.
Thank you for having me. This is very exciting.
No problem. Gosh, your background is so unusual. And I was reading on your website that where were you? You were growing up in London, Seoul, Tokyo,
Philadelphia,
Philly, New York.
New York.
Like,
yeah.
What was your childhood?
Well, I grew up in England, but my mother studied child language acquisition under Noam Chomsky, and so I was basically her guinea pig. And even though we were in London, I wasn't allowed to speak any English at home. And she really strictly reinforced this. So it was kind of like my survival was based on speaking Japanese. So I was able to learn Japanese at a pretty proficient level, even though I wasn't living in Japan. Which was really lucky because when I went back to Japan, I was kind of a few years behind, but, able to catch up. I think a lot of like bicultural kids, third culture kids, they go to international school, whereas I went to a local Japanese school. So I kind of grew up with the full Japanese education and everything, which has really helped me now as a translator and stuff like that. So you actually use the term third cultural on your website too, and I'd never heard that term before. Maybe it's my complete ignorance, but so what is third cultural exactly, a third cultural kid? Third culture kid is kind of a term that's thrown around for kids who have bicultural backgrounds, who don't quite belong to one single culture. They tend to be bilingual, sometimes trilingual. They tend to go to international school. They tend to have identity crises in their teenage years. You fit right at home in theater, of course. Exactly. Yeah. That's why you resonate with all the outcasts in theater or in the stories of theater. I think even you could be growing up in a single culture, but if you grow up in ethnic minority, for example, I think a lot of times you're projected an expectation to represent a certain culture, especially if you're like Asian or any kind of like minority culture that isn't actually African American, but is kind of like people perceive you as fresh off the boat. And so then you feel this pressure to represent this culture that you're not actually of. And so, I think there are many different kinds of third culture kids, but it's kind of like when the culture isn't just given to you, but like you're looking for it and you kind of find your own sense of identity, you cultivate it by yourself. That's kind of what it means. Well, do you have, I guess, your own, of course you have your own sense of self-identity, but what do you identify with? Because I mean, looking at you right now, I am a white male who presents very much as Caucasian. If I get very bushy beard, I've been cast as Middle Eastern once or twice, which probably wouldn't fly now. Who knows? But for you, like, if you were like, I'm Korean, I'd be like, okay. And if you said I'm Japanese, I'd say, okay. But if you were like, I'm American, I'm like, okay. Right. So how do you identify at this point? Because I guess you said you grew up in London, or were you born in London? I was born in London. Okay, so you are a British citizen. I am. However, because I only lived there until I was 10, and I guess, everyone who speaks English in America speaks with an American accent. And then I've lived in the United States for so long that I've lost that part of my identity. I don't really identify as British and more of a New Yorker, I guess. On the Asian side, my mother is Korean Japanese, but she's third generation Korean Japanese. And the historical context here is that Japan had colonized Korea for 37 years, starting in 1999 until the end of the war, Second World War. And a whole bunch of Koreans migrated to Japan and kind of laid their roots there. And then there's a whole movement of going back to Korea after the liberation of Korea. And of course, the Koreans in Japan had to pick between the North and the South, and now we know who made the right choice. But at the time, people had no idea. They all looked like good prospects. But then a bunch of them stuck around in Japan, and my family is of that demographic. We consist of about 0.05% of the population. So 1 in 200 people, I guess, is of Korean descent in Japan. And there's a substantial number of us. Obviously, everyone's pretty much like mentally Japanese, but Japan isn't a country that allows citizenship just by being born there. So a lot of them actually retain their Korean citizenship, even though they're third, fourth generation, which is kind of crazy.
I didn't know that. I guess I just sort of naively assumed that whatever country you were born in, that's what citizenship you got associated with. And then you could also apply or get citizenship of your parents later on in life. Yeah, I guess there's a lot of
I think in America it makes sense because America is a country of immigrants, right? Minus the Native Americans, but Japan is a country. It's a homogenous country that's already have their population there. The country wasn't built upon people arriving into the country, so the majority don't have an incentive to hand out citizenships to, and also it can be xenophobic too.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, bringing this back to theater, then you've come here, you moved to New York, and actually fulfilled. I was reading that you got your college graduation ceremony. You dove into a conservatory program, et cetera, completed your curriculum on a tourist visa, which I guess we're not supposed to talk about.
You dug deep. Hey, I already got my artist green card now, and I'm applying for citizenship soon, so I think I'm in the clear. But I mean, I just didn't want to waste time. So the tourist visa allowed for up to a year. And so I just went to school. I didn't even tell the school. They had no idea.
And then was it sort of kind of a no-brainer to stick around New York for a while? Or I guess when was this in the timeline of the original production of Rent in Japan?
Oh, I see. I had done Rent, and this was my first theatrical professional production amongst a bunch of professional actors. And actually, it's Rent, so they had some non-actors too, singers and such. However, I think the experience for me, I got through it, but at the same time, I was like, I need training. If I'm going to survive in this business, I have no idea what this is about or how to act and all this stuff. I'd only taken snippets of conservatories in the summer and stuff. And so after Rent, I decided that I was going to dive into acting school, but I had to finish college first in Japan. So I did that, and then I went to acting school. So after Rent, I didn't do any professional productions for about 3 years. Or longer, I think. And then while I was in school, I got an offer for an original Frank Wildhorn musical in Japan called Mitsuko, which was about the first Japanese lady who married a foreigner back in late 1800s. She married an Austrian aristocrat and then they had 7 children, of which the second child, who's half Japanese, half Austrian, became the founding father of the European Union. Which people don't know about, but the person who founded the European Union was half Japanese. So I played that role. Yeah. Sorry, going back to your question. So yeah, then I went to acting school, and then there was a showcase, and then I guess I got an agent there, and then that was how I sponsored my visa.
What did you get your degree in Japan? Because you said you finished your college degree in Japan, right?
Just liberal arts.
So you just your standard hand wavy liberal art degree.
Bit of literature, a bit of theater studies, art, history, international politics, business.
That's cool. Okay, so then you come you come here, but then in looking at your resume, you've done good work here in the US. You continue to work in Japan, and like, I guess taking it back to these videos you've translated, it looks like now you're building sort of a reputation for being able to do this, which we'll get to in a second. But at what point were you like, oh, I'm just gonna take, my shot and Helpless from Hamilton and just like translate them into Japanese and then make music videos out of them?
I think, having done a couple of shows in Japan, I wasn't always fully satisfied with the translations that I was given, that I was working with as an actor. I remember one show, I'm not going to name it because I just don't want to, throw people under the bus, but I submitted something like 10 to 12 pages of requests to amend my lines, which is a lot. I made so much noise. I was like, the translations suck. I didn't say that, but I was like, it doesn't reflect the original intention, which really, really bothered me because it was such a good show, that they dedicated a whole day. Basically, they stopped rehearsals and they dedicated a whole day to do a roundtable to just go through the entire script, with the translation suggestions that I did. And so, since back then I was like, I want to actually see if I can actually do it. Since, it's easy to criticize other people's work, but, can you actually do it? Like, that was something that I actually hadn't tried and, wasn't quite confident about. And then, Hamilton came along and I was like, fuck it, let's do it. I had a solo show coming up, so the stakes were really low. It's somewhere where you can just experiment, do things. And I'd gone in for Hamilton in the US for over 10 times, and so I had a lot of practice in English, and I starting to understand the emphasis that need to be met, the cadences, all the kind of lyrical nuances that need to be honored were really sinking into my body. And so it just felt like a good moment to just see what would happen if I did it in Japanese.
It's really fun for me to watch the videos, because I was telling you before we started recording that I took 3 years of Japanese in high school, that I can't really remember anything. I can't remember any of it anymore. But of course, one of the great parts about Hamilton, and just like any song in any well-known show, is the rhythm of the words is as much, it drives the song as much as the words and as much as everything else, right? So you've got to get that right. And when I'm listening to your versions of Lin-Manuel's expert verses, I don't feel like I'm losing anything when it comes to the musicality of the numbers, if that makes sense.
Wow, thank you for saying that.
And well, you're welcome. And the comments that I was reading too in the YouTube videos, and for those listening, we'll have the links to watch the videos in the show notes for this episode, so make sure to go watch them. But a lot of the comments were very similar, especially for, I think it was for Helpless. It was like, oh, the translations are awesome. The rhythm is great, especially when Hamilton comes in, when you come in. And it's really, really cool to me. And I cannot imagine, I don't discount how hard it was to probably get that right, because when you're translating it, I assume that there's no direct translation to a lot of the way that, the way Lin puts end of one word as the beginning of the next, translating that to a different language has got to keep you up all night.
Yeah, it's like a puzzle. Honestly, I really, really enjoy it. Otherwise, I don't think I'd be doing. I've finished about 3/5 of the show now, and I just kind of do it on my spare time because it's. I learned so much from doing it, I guess. It's really, really, really exciting to listen to it into Japanese, and to, I don't know, find out that it works. just because I love my life. One of my life missions is to bridge Japan and the US, and like, for example, I co-founded a company called Broadway in Japan, where we would fly in Broadway directors, choreographers, actors to do workshops for Japanese aspiring musical theater kids. And it's just something that gives me a lot of joy. And I think musical theater is huge in Japan, and it's still growing, but rap musicals are not there. I don't think that rap musicals have been transferred to Japan in the way that we experience them here. And I think what's essential is the wordplay. It's the enjoyment that you get from hearing the lyrical just complexity, but also the auditorial joy that you get from these nouns and these syllables that are just kind of overlapping, and it's just like it's ear candy, right? Like, Japan isn't like traditionally a rhyming culture. Although way back when they used to write haiku and tanka, it was. But in kind of contemporary pop music and whatnot, rhyming isn't really emphasized. In rap it is, but that's not as mainstream as it is here, or expected of when people translate lyrics into Japanese, especially for musicals. So it's kind of like introducing a new concept.
That fascinates me, and I feel like you could become this expert university teacher or something, just a professor teaching how to rhyme and wordplay in Japanese.
I mean, none of this is official though. Like none of it's like officially sanctioned or anything. So like it's all.
I know, but I mean, there's got to be in the back of your mind. There's got to be something like maybe Lynn's going to notice this and call me up and say like, "Hey, man, I'm going to license your translations because." They're that good.
I would drop down to my knees and just start crying if that happened.
No, I mean, they're good. Especially, I like that you're continuing to do it too, because you said you got 3/5 of the show done. I was thinking too, another great show, that recent show is Six, that has.
I was thinking about that.
So much good wordplay. I was going to say, I recommend that next.
Yes.
If you want to take a break and kind of go back into singing and less rapping.
That would be a fun show to translate for sure.
And I think the concert pop presentation of that would actually perform pretty well in Japan.
Mm-hmm. Women's rights. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Women's rights,
Depends
K-pop,
or
J-pop sort of thing. Yeah. That actually, all right. So there you go. You can take that idea. I give that to you.
Dibs.
So I actually wanted to bring up Broadway in Japan. So I'm glad that you brought it up a second ago. You co-founded a company and you bring these great Broadway performers. I know recently you worked with Telly Leung and a couple others, that you're bringing them out there to perform in Japan, and you've performed with Daphne Rubin Vega and all these others. What was the impetus to do that, to bring Broadway out there, aside from the obvious of what you just said of, musical theater is big in Japan. Side note for those who don't know, the Tonys, not this year because of quarantine, but the Tonys are telecast to Japan. So
yes,
Japanese can still watch the Tonys live. But I guess now that I say that, it's obvious why you did it, but why has no one done it before this?
They have, but I think it's an access issue. There's
really?
There's a huge language barrier. Japanese people very much rely on, person-to-person introduction for their connections. And I, just from my observation, even Japanese producers at the top level, maintain 1 to 2 key industry contacts, and they rely heavily on these to connect them to anybody on Broadway. And I think, my position, and also, Broadway in Japan was my business partner's idea. Mayumi Ando, she was in Rent for 6 years on Broadway when it still was on. We actually don't do Broadway in Japan anymore. However, in that moment, what we both shared as a vision was providing access to all the amazing teachers that New York has to offer. I think there's so much enthusiasm towards musical theater in Japan, but obviously, 6,000 miles away, there's the distance. Or is it kilometers? I don't know. And then there's a language barrier. And so in order to provide the master classes, the really, really top level education that Broadway has to offer. You need that environment, and you need the translators, and also you need them to be there. I mean, that's the thing about the quarantine, is like classes on Zoom is just not quite the same, is it?
Oh, not at all. And you've also recently just participated in something 35 millimeter, a musical exhibition.
Yes, by Ryan Scott Oliver.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Okay, I lost a bunch of gigs, like many other artists, and I reached out to the producer who I was supposed to perform in the Japanese original cast of Edges by Pascal Paul. And I was like, okay, I need work. I'm really good at this. I sent him my Hamilton videos. I said, do you have any shows that are coming up that I can potentially translate? And within like a week or two, he offered me the gig to translate 35 millimeters. And I was like, I'll take it. I'm actually really happy about that, because I don't know if 2020 didn't happen, if Corona didn't happen, I might not be doing that. It's the step in the right direction, because I think if I do want to pursue translating, and potentially, I mean, the dream would be to translate Hamilton into Japanese officially, obviously, to start building credits is good for me.
Are you getting I guess, asked more to do translations in general, though? I mean, I guess, is the talent pool of translators a big pool, or are you becoming this niche person inside, a big pond, or a big ocean, I guess?
I think it's quite small, and I think I think I'm quite lucky in that way.
Oh, yeah. That's so cool. Yeah, and you've got such a cultural background that I think lends itself to do this sort of thing too, because as you were saying a little while ago, that it's about the wordplay and the nuances and all of these things, right? That if you don't understand the context of the words, I mean, you can literally translate the word table to table, chair to chair, whatever it is. But if you don't know why they're using those words, then the translation, I think, gets a little lost, right?
Yeah. So I think where a lot of translators stumble is getting fixated on the literal meaning of a word, whereas I think viewing lines or lyrics as a function amongst a big story is key to nailing the translations. Basically, what purpose does this line serve? What purpose does this lyric serve? It moves the story forward in a certain ways, therefore a certain nuance or a certain information, certain sarcasm, has to be conveyed. Sometimes it's a statement that's actually a question, and like this would go over the head of a certain translator, or like Japanese people have different sensibilities. Sarcasm doesn't really exist in Japan, and so therefore it's better to change that into a direct statement. There's just like all these little tweaks that you want to make, and then take idioms that are American idioms or English idioms don't exist in Japanese. Obviously, then you want to find the equivalent idiom in Japanese. That is something that it definitely makes it easier for the Japanese audience to listen to it for the first time, and for the meaning to kind of like drop into their brains without them having to do extra processing. Because as an audience member, when you're watching a show, there's so much information coming at you visually, auditorily. And so the more you can condense information into a simple form that is easily digestible, yet concise, the better. And I think that is the job of a theatrical translator.
Why do you think musical theater is so big in Japan?
I think Japanese people really like cathartic entertainment. Like amongst musical theater, they love the tragic ones. They love Les Mis. They love Miss Saigon. It's like, I don't know. I think it's this like Japanese sensibility where they're very, very, they're quite, like as a population, they're quite serious.
Right.
Kind of like the Germans a little bit. So they like to kind of like go in and feel emotions and kind of like sit there and, you know, like they'll be really quiet in the audience and you're like, are they enjoying it? But they are. They really are. It's not like America where people are like, whoo, or anything. And so, with Corona right now, they're even quieter because they're not allowed to scream.
Yeah, I guess looking into what you just said, I sort of pull out of it that as a culture, it's a like you said, it's a quiet culture, a serious culture that maybe over time and traditionally has been inhibited. And so this gives them sort of permission to feel, whether outwardly or not. But yeah, I mean, the same reason why I guess anybody really identifies with something that causes them to feel or to empathize, to feel emotion. It's something that if you're not normally able to do that, it gives you permission to do so. And like you said, it's a bit of a catharsis.
Yeah, I think so. I will say, though, the prime demographic for musical theater in Japan are females aged kind of 30 and onwards, I would say. Huh. I think that consists like 70 to 80% of the demographic, maybe. And I mean, like, for example, there's Takarazuka, which is an all-female theater troupe in Japan. And women play male roles and female roles. And they're all female, but there are male role stars and female role stars. And they are absolutely worshipped by their fans, to the point where, you know, it's like they fall in love with these actors who live these roles, which is very interesting. I think it's a form of escapism, which kind of has a negative connotation, but, you know, it's like fantasy. It's very interesting. It's kind of like, why do women like 50 Shades of Grey? I feel like there's something in common there.
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Yes, it's giving permission to do or talk or think about something that previously is a little bit taboo in your circle or your culture. I'm following you. I'm picking up what you're putting down. I get it.
It's that romantic life that you might not have in your actual life. It's kind of so a lot of the really romantic musical theater stories are pretty popular in Japan. They keep getting revived every year.
Well, I like that. So you are in a unique position to have lived and worked in the US, in London, and in Japan. So do you have a preference or like a perfect place where if you were like, all right, you have to pick one place to do what you do, where would you be?
Man.
That is three very different cultures.
Yeah. I can't really speak for London because I haven't lived there in a long time. I think, you know, New York is the apex of the business. So to make it here is still my biggest goal. And that's why I'm still in New York City. I think the longer I spend time in New York, the more I have to offer whenever I go back to Japan. And Japan allows me to kind of experiment with my bigger ideas because bigger opportunities are available for me in Japan.
I like that. All right. Yeah. So we'll wrap up this episode with the 3 standard closing questions I ask everybody. The first one is, what motivates you?
Oh, what motivates me? I mean, this kind of sounds selfish, but just to achieve my maximum potential. I mean,
you got one life.
Well, yeah, one life, but maximum potential. But, you know, I think I can be very useful in certain contexts, and I would like to match my abilities to the market in a way that maximizes everybody's happiness and also mine.
Very cool. Okay, so the next question is, what advice would you give to your younger self and younger people listening now, starting out down a similar path?
Stop being such a people pleaser and prioritize yourself. No one cares.
And then the last question here. If you could only see one show for the rest of your life, but you can see it as many times as you want, what would you see?
Well, there's shows like Spring Awakening I absolutely love, but if that's the only show I watch, I feel like I get pretty depressed. I don't know. I mean, In the Heights, maybe it makes me happy.
All right, fair. Okay. Yeah. So stick around, everybody listening, stick around to the end of the episode, and we'll play against versions of My Shot and Helpless in their entirety. And then again, check the show notes if you want to watch the video versions of them. They're amazing. And where can we find you on social media?
At Parton-Shin.
You can find me online at thetheaterpodcast.com, on Instagram and Twitter at theater_podcast, on facebook.com/officialtheaterpodcast. Please leave a rating and a review wherever you're listening now. This is edited by Matthew Hendershot. And again, thank you so much for this fun conversation. I've never had a musical theater multicultural translator before. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.
Take a deep breath, make the world a little colorful.
I am not throwing away my shot 人生棒に振るもんかアメリカのよう生まれたての貧乏人生棒に振るもんか奨学金取りに行くぜ自慢じゃないけどやばいんだぜ俺頭脳明晰育ちは貧乏目立とうと叫ぼうとしても誰も聞いてくれない俺は原石だダイヤになる言葉の力で上にのし上がるんだたった19子供扱いニューヨークそ寒いのに金もない打たれ強くても丸腰で立ち向かうにもひもじくて何もできない夢は派手だ炎のように炎上おめえ返上だ教えるよ俺は ALEXANDER この植民地特にイギリスには有益ビビりすぎてマジ自立できない生き死に作詞されまくりジョージ3世の小遣いのために独立が許されるはずはない革命は間違いない今世紀台本に主人公の場入り教科書に現れればびっくりこの命も惜しくないいや本当にぶち上がるつもり人生棒に振るもんか人生棒に振るもんかアメリカのよう生まれたての貧乏人生棒に振るもんか人生棒に振るもんか人生棒に振るもんかアメリカのよう生まれたての貧乏人生棒に振るもんか繰り出すんだ王様ができないウランスは無政府ジョティア正しい発音は状態喧嘩したら相手は交代しましたしたてや見習いだクレイジーなお前らマジやばいなや独立戦争そのものがチャンスしたてあげるぜ階級とパン甘なめ消し奴隷制がはばかり自由の国とかマジなばかり生きるか死ぬか大一番騎乗位で攻める黒の騎士団ワンシャおバカたち声を下げて目指してるものは俺も兼ねて同じ悔いなく生きたい気をつけないと長いと出る杭打たれるぞバー見てみろミサ・ラファエット生かしてんだろパンツおしゃれよ君も好きだよみんなで作戦計画立てましょう神がこんな俺らを集めたちょっくらこの社会のあり方すら変えてみせるぜ奴隷制廃止論者玉装填したらどんなもんじゃ喋りすぎかなたまらない気持ち口が止まらないマジ初めてこの街でできた友達ガチのせろお立ち台人生棒に振るもんか人生棒に振るもんかアメリカのよう生まれたての貧乏人生棒に振るもんか I am not throwing away my shot 人生棒に振るもんかアメリカのよう生まれたての貧乏人生棒に振るもんみんなでさ Oh, 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 hey oh, 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 oh聞かせろよ oh, 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 yeah oh, 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 oh 声を上げて Come on Rise up 立ち上がる時だ Rise up 仲間たちみんなで Rise up 自由になるまで Rise up この植民地がそう Rise up この植民地こそ Rise up 立ち上がるべきさ Rise up この植民地こそ Rise up Rise up 死について考えすぎてまるでメモリー。いつ来る俺に眠り、すぐこの先に見えたら逃げるか受け入れるべき、まるで聞こえないメロディー。死ぬと思ってた20歳に、かのふるさとみんな若死に。人生生き急ぐ理由、それは授かった時間がごくわずかだから待った。この瞬間こそムーブメントなのに、人が足りないのは偶然。銃で光線流す敵の地、目指すはモーセ約束の地で、独立勝ち取れば末裔の繁栄が結末か、それか逆襲のサイクル、学習せずぐるぐると繰り返す。街ででも血に染まるでも、独立のためでも、国も樹立してても機能してない経済構造、国の定義はどんな状況、期待裏切るぐらい世界変えたい、待ってられない甘ったれてない、犠牲と悲しみを見てきた、初めて夢見るぜ明日。 And I am not gonna wait my shot, I am not gonna wait my shot、 アメリカのよう生まれたての貧乏、 I am not gonna wait my shot, I am not gonna wait my shot, I am not gonna wait my shot、 アメリカのよう生まれたての貧乏、 I am not gonna wait my shot。 Oh, 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 oh、 人生棒に振る棒に振るもんか。
恥ずかしがり、その日は兵隊たちとのパーリー、姉は社交能力抜群、あなたが現れ心ドックン、気づかれたくてひたすら目くばせ、みんな踊り宴に身を任せ、Dopeなリズムに Wine and Dine、 姉に言ったの彼は私のもの、姉はあなたへと近づく、不安な目で私それ見る、諦めかけたその瞬間、振り向くあなた、私は無力、あの目がマジで無力、どうしよう、虜になったらあなたは無力、大好きなの、大好きなの、もう無力、もうね、虜になったらハマったわ。1週間後毎晩書く手紙、あなたの返事読んではにかみ、姉が茶化しておスイップ多再生、
シェアしない妹マジ最低。
2週間後感じるストレス、パパにあなたが結婚申し込む、はためから眺めるワイン and dine、 賢すぎてすでに涙が出る、パパはあなたへと近づく、それ見て私はパニック、パパの返事をよろしく、振り向くあなた、私は
ぶっちゃけお金はない地位もない期待はしないでいただきたい、あるのは名誉我慢強さと大学の単位とこの頭脳、本当君の家族に救われた、ペギーは味方、アンジェリカには食らいつかれた、大丈夫俺の愛はまっしぐら、ハーレムで始めよう二人暮らし、子供の時からずっと一人だったててなしママは死別、ワイルドなまま育った、母の顔は胸の中、俺がいる限り悲しませはしないさ、ライザこの気持ちを心配はないさ、イライザいれば